I'm going to lead a little prayer. This isn't exactly a church event, but I'm a person who prays, so I want to ask God's blessing upon what we're about to do. So, pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Loving God, we're grateful for this day and for the opportunity to be together. Please give us gracious speaking, listening, discernment, and direction for the time that we're together. And please bless anyone who might be on our hearts that are in special need of your care today. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right, friends and neighbors, here we are at E Pluribus Unum. Chantel titled this a retreat, and we go round and round about this, about what to call a thing. Retreat is a military metaphor that means to pull back in order to regroup. And so there are some times where life feels like it's getting the best of us, and the wisest thing to do is to step back a bit and rethink, regroup, maybe re-strategize. So that can sort of fit today. What I've done is create what I hope is a conversation among friends. And I would say that of those of you that I'm looking at on the screen, probably have a personal relationship with about 2/3, maybe 3/4. Some of you I know only through media, but most of us have been together at some point along the way. I've asked 7 people. I'm one of the 7, and my sister Cathryn and my brother-in-law Guy are also participating along with a total of 7 of us. And what I've decided to do is give each of us a maximum of 7 minutes apiece to say something on the topic. And I've given them some prompts to think about in advance. So if that works, that's about 50 minutes worth of presentation time out of 90. Okay. So I didn't want you listening to a lecture the whole time, but I wanted to be part of a conversation among interesting people. I've asked all the presenters not to just speak from intellect and rationality, but to also try to include something from their life, a story, mind and heart, connecting on this idea of what I'm calling E Pluribus Unum. Sammy, can you see Sammy right there? He's co-hosting, and he's going to be one of those 7, but he'll also send us at one point into breakout groups. You'll be randomly paired with one other person, and you'll be given a 15-minute block of time. So you'll have roughly 7 minutes, 7.5 minutes, just like the presenters, to talk to one other person. We'll do that about midway through, so you kind of get a sense of how we're approaching this topic and how you might get in the flow of it. And then toward the last 20 minutes or so, there'll just be an opportunity to speak from this forum, anybody raising their hand and offering something, and then I'll bring it to a close. So that's the format that we're following. I did something called E Pluribus Unum years ago when I was at Riverside. That time I made it more about words that get used in our political discourse and what their deeper meaning might have been. So it was the same title, but not really the same concept. What I'm looking at here is the idea that on our Great Seal, you know, that American seal that has an eagle in it, and it's got, I think it has olive branches in one, claw and weapons in another one. It's a kind of confused eagle. What's it trying to be? It's trying to bring peace, and it's got arrows in the other claw. But it had one of the things on the Great Seal is this phrase that the founders put there, E Pluribus Unum, from the many one. I'm very conscious living in the United States in one of what are keep being referred to as a swing state. We're one of those states where apparently the upcoming political season, especially the presidential and vice presidential stuff, is in high focus. And so more than other parts of the country, we're getting a lot of political advertising. And a great deal of it, in my opinion, is about defeating an enemy. We must conquer. You know, we must make sure that this other group of people with this other point of view doesn't get sway. So when we behave that way and do it consistently, I think we work against unity before we even start. Uh, we're united with only our party, which is from the word part and not whole. So but the founders knew at the beginning of the experiment of creating this country that the 13 colonies were not all that similar to one another, and the phrase "e pluribus unum" reflects that, from the many. So they're starting with the idea that we're many and separate, the 13 of us, but could we find our way to unity? Get that? There's a presumption underneath that phrase that we start with separateness and move toward union. My question is, what do you think about the universe itself? Is it already a unity in which we take part as individuals? Or is the converse true? Are we individuals within the vastness of the universe who then seek out some sort of commonality and create it intentionally? And then how does that play out in the way that we live our lives? When you wake up in the morning, do you feel like you're a part of everyone and everything, or apart from everyone and everything? Think for a minute, was there ever a time in your life where you were alone looking at a starry sky on a clear night? Did you ever just gaze into the field of stars and feel insignificant? I had that experience once when I was first in seminary, and I kind of went out of body with it. Spirit kind of did something with me and reminded me that they weren't only in front of me, that they were behind me and on either side of me. When you're looking up at it, if you're on a flat earth, you're looking up at a starry sky. But if you understand that you're on a ball in the midst of all of these, there's as many of them behind you and on either side of you as there are in front of you, and that you're in the middle of all of it, that you belong to all of it. You're not an object looking at it as much as you are a being within it. So that's kind of what I'm asking, and the people that'll be presenting here have given some thought to, am I a part of all things, or am I apart from all things? So I'm sitting here with two wise people, so I'm going to pick on Cathryn first because she's right over my shoulder. So, and I've got my iPhone set for 7 minutes, or I will in just a second. So, Cathryn, sound off.
Good morning, everyone. A lot of you already know me as Nathan's baby sister. For those of you whom I haven't met yet, I'm glad that you're here. I'm coming from the place of being trained as a life coach, particularly as a creative coach. My specialty is helping people get underneath their life story and publish that in a book or on a podcast or in some form where they can share with others. And one of the key learnings that I have as a life coach is interested is interesting. It's my job to be interested in what someone else is going to say. So interested is interesting. If I am a good listener, a compassionate listener, and I ask people questions, but then also wait to hear the answer, that makes me interesting and it makes them want to share more with me instead of me being a listener who listens only long enough until the other person stops talking so that I can get my 2 cents in. And I should, you should, I think you ought to, etc. That's judgment language. So one of my goals as a life coach is to be interested in the stories of the people that I'm listening to. Be a good listener, leave space for that listening to happen, and then have a thoughtful response. And in the current situation that we're dealing with in our country, there's a lot of people saying a lot of things that I don't necessarily agree with. And that can be difficult. But one of the things I've learned is if I can accept what a person is saying, which means being a compassionate listener, keeping quiet while someone else is saying whatever is on their mind, and then accept what they're saying. My acceptance is not an agreement. My acceptance is an attempt at understanding. And there are often times when I don't understand, but I can stand in acceptance. I accept that you just said what you believe. I don't necessarily understand what you believe, but I accept that that's where you are. I don't understand. I might not agree, but I accept. And I think acceptance is right now, it's the tiny little piece of real estate that I can be on that is a safe place right now. One of the other key things for me right now is I have two Viktor Frankl quotes that I'm going to read to you that sort of solidify this concept. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz. If you're not familiar with his work, Man's Search for Meaning is where this quote was pulled. So between stimulus and response, there is a space. And sometimes it's all I can do is just to hold that space and not say, yeah, but, or I think you're a stupid poo-poo head, or some other thing that I might have in my thoughts. I'm not going to name call, I'm not going to judge, and I'm not going to engage in hate speech. Frankl also said, forces beyond our control can take away everything we possess, except one thing, our freedom. The freedom to choose how you will respond to a situation is our greatest freedom. And Gloria Steinem said, the truth will set you free. First, it'll piss you off, but it'll set you free. And those are the things that I'm clinging to right now is I feel as though I'm knowing my truth. I'd love to share that with people who want to be interested in what I have to say, but not everybody is, because they may have already done their own research and made their own decisions. But at least if I hold the space of acceptance, that helps me not hate, because hating isn't helping. Someone asked me recently, what is hate speech? And she was coming at me for an argument. She wanted to talk about censorship and they are doing this and they are doing that and they are preventing me. And she said, what is hate speech? And I held my ground, held my space for a moment and gave it thought and said, I think that hate speech is anything that I might say to you that would diminish your humanity. And she's like, wah, because she couldn't fight me on that. And so we didn't have the argument that she showed up ready to have. I just said, I'm going to try my very best not to say something to you that would diminish your humanity, because I recognize you as a human being and you are someone who has value. If that's the only thing you and I share is humanity, that's enough. And we'll start from there. And it let us get through what I thought might be a difficult situation. So I'm going to just remind you, acceptance is not agreement. Acceptance is not understanding. We just accept that a person is where they are. I'm in my space, you're in your space. And if we allow that space, sometimes in quiet, in silence, how can I improve upon silence is my other go to sometimes. And that's what I want to share. Awesome. Woohoo!
Look at
I made
that.
it down to the
Oh my
last
God.
second.
Isn't she great?
I win. I win.
I'm noticing on those of you that are on screen, thank you for that. Some of you look like you're taking notes, which might be helpful because there are 6 other little presenters that are going to be coming. And if you want to have a comment about something somebody said, it might be helpful to have jotted down something as you're going along. Hey, Sammy, would you like to go next?
Go, Sammy.
Yeah,
And may I ask you, Sammy, would you spend 30 seconds to a minute on who you are anyway, a little bit of bio?
sure. I'm Sammy Madden. A little bit about me. Um, now I'm trying to figure
Don't
out what
fail me.
to say.
I gave you this assignment a week ago.
No, I won't fail you. Um, I th One of the things that I think I'm gonna really focus on is coming from something that Cathryn talks about, which is acceptance. I'm a do many things, but I'm a disability advocate, and really through that, where it's trying to help individuals feel like they're accepted. And one of the many things I do with that is talking to college students, which I get to do next week, about this topic of disability and what it means to live as someone with a disability, and then looking through that as to being accepted into um, not just um, the what is friends or your workplace or something like that, but it's also just your own internal acceptance as well. And in thinking about out of many one or one out of many, um, I was thinking about the concept of the ADA law and where you had all these individuals who wanted acceptance, who wanted to have um, everything that we look at in the law. And so you have all these people coming together and wanting this one thing.
Let's make sure we define ADA.
Yes, sorry. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so you had all these individuals of varying disabilities and advocacies and all this who were fighting for this law to come through. And so you had all these individuals coming up with this law. And then you have, like myself, I see it as I was someone who benefited from that because I was able to go to school and get the assistance I needed. So we have the out of many one fighting for that. And then from my side, I have a international group that I support, and so and I'm the president of that. And so there's the advocacy of those individuals with who are amputees, and that's someone who was born without arms or legs, or they lost it later in life. And so it's the advocacy of those needing whatever assistance they need or brainstorming on what they might need and looking at today's technology and saying, well, how can you use that for yourself? So out of the one for the many.
Sammy, you have a disability that's visible from a glance. Not everybody's disability is of that nature,
Correct.
but yours is. Um, can you speak to what it's been? How old are you now?
Well, I turned 32 yesterday, so
Oh, congratulations. Um, has your sense of being all alone in the world or being surrounded by a world that includes you changed over the years?
um I've at times felt like I've been all alone, and then other times I felt like the world accepts me. When I was younger, I felt like I was all alone because, as a kid growing up, you struggle with, your own disability, and then others see it and decide to pounce on it and go after it. But then as I've gone older, I see it as an acceptance from the world because I go around and I do talks and I talk about what it's like to have it. And then you hear from other people, oh, hey, I had this and it really helped that you talked about this, or here's how the world has accepted me. And you see that, um, take for instance the Paralympics that just happened, and you have everyone who's seeing all these athletes, and they're saying, wow, this is amazing what this person has been able to do. And so you see this global acceptance of from all these different parts of the world, people with disabilities being able to do X, and everyone's astonished as to how they're able to do that. And so you have that global acceptance now, and just this awe of that.
Okay.
Awesome.
I'm going to come back to you later. You've yielded 2 minutes to the chair, I think, unless you have something else to say. Sammy's also the co-host. He's going to later send us into breakout groups. But for right now, thank you for those thoughts. Let's see. I think I'd like to call on Lisa next. Lisa, would you Lisa has an expertise and a PhD to prove it, that she helps people talk to one another and find commonality. It's part of why I wanted you to speak today. So would you, tell us who you are and what you got to say.
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa, and I'll weave in a little bit about me as I do the reflection this morning. But I am, of course, I'm a prayer partner of Father Nathan's. Known you, I think 25, 27 years, a long time. It's been a long time. Yes, yes. And so grateful to be here with you all. I am a firm believer in the resilience of the human spirit. And I believe, I have a deep-seated faith. I'm a third order Dominican, but I do believe that we are called to kind of push ourselves a little bit into some places that stretch our emotional fabric, and that's actually a really good thing, that we are more similar than we are different. I think we are a part of one another, but and at our essence of who God made us, we are more similar. But I do think that there are circumstances, experiences, and perhaps barriers, sometimes self-imposed, sometimes fear-based, or sometimes we may be born into those barriers that work against that unity. And I believe we're obligated as people living here on this earth to break through anything that causes disunity with safety and with respect and dignity and boundaries that cause no harm to another, but that we're obligated to kind of stretch into that. And that truly living in unity means uplifting one another, encouraging one another, that at the very core, that supports each other to be the very best of who God calls each one of us to be. And to do this, I heard this in Cathryn, it involves listening. And I think it's really, really listening and going to the corners of the places where there is despair, to listen to that and to bring light, but then to also receive light, that the other has, to go in with an assumption that the other has as much light to give. And that we can meet in the middle about that, and allowing the space for each person to use that unique opportunity to bring their gifts to the forefront, because we all have them. As a career, I've intentionally sought out ways to listen mostly to those who are most vulnerable, to hear their voices, because each has a voice, but maybe we don't perhaps listen because of different reasons, and to seek commonality with those who seem different. So I've entered everywhere from the prison system, brought in foster kids into my home, walked the streets with women who have been caught up in prostitution, unwed mothers and babies, those living on the river bottoms without a home, those that I wouldn't have normally have met otherwise with Father Nathan's work, and everyone in between. And I did in my mid-20s, I gave up my belongings and went and lived in voluntary poverty to start a women's shelter in Phoenix. We'll be celebrating our 25 years this coming May. But I think that in order to have unity, you push yourselves out of the boundaries a little bit to interact with folks, and it takes hospitality. It takes humility of letting go of your own ego. It takes being open to leading with God's nudgings and wisdom. It takes healing within and to do your own work so that you can bring healing to others. I believe in St. Francis's prayer. I don't always do it as well as I can, but I try to seek that understanding first instead of trying to seek to be understood first. And I go back to St. Paul's readings that we are all parts of one body. We are all the many different parts, and we need one another and one another's gifts in order to truly function and be there. I'm not so Pollyanna to think that everybody, is kumbaya and can do that. But I think we sell ourselves short a lot by not. We can do better by not seeking out unity in a way that we can do better. And I think often I do, whereas it's interesting. I think I'm often more comfortable going into, the street corners or the river bottoms or, and so forth, versus, in our own circles. I think we are also called, in our own smaller communities and our own smaller circles, to try to bring that unity. And it's tricky and it's complicated, but in the end, it creates a space for each of us to be more of who God called us to be.
I want to press you a little bit on our common history about the founding of Maggie's Place 25 years ago. Lisa was one of 4 young women. You were a grad student at the time, right?
I was working on my PhD, very comfortable with a wonderful roommate and teaching at ASU and, had my hands full, but I had we started out with a group of 40 and it dwindled to 5 women who decided to take the leap of faith to create a space. We didn't even know who or what or how, but we just kind of took that leap of faith to begin.
And you rented a house near downtown Phoenix before it was gentrified, and you started inviting homeless pregnant women to come live with you in your house.
We did. I was, I'm a community developer in a career, but I was a very 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 new community developer at that point. So that's exactly right. So we invited the community, and it really was God. It was not us. It was God. It was the Holy Spirit. And the community. And that helped bring some unity because there were people on all sides of the whatever classification you have to support, who could get behind supporting people that were, in a tough circumstance that any of us could, each of us have been in a tough circumstance. So it united people from all sides, no matter what the side was, to come together.
Well, and one of them, I remember when we were at that pizza parlor down the street and we were sitting in a booth talking about this. And I said, I think the harder part is going to be living together with each other. The mission is not
Yes,
as difficult as the community.
absolutely.
Being one, living in close quarters with other people who leave their dirty clothes on the floor and
Right.
who leave the butter out and don't know how to put the dishes in the sink, whatever. Those things are harder, I think. But you were also trying to appeal both on the abortion question to pro-life and pro-choice people because you had homeless pregnant women who had very little freedom to act. They were reactive because their circumstance was so dire. Remember that?
That's right. And you were our spiritual director during that. And we're very grateful for you to that. And one of the things that we saw was that people on both sides of this very contentious, very heartfelt debate could come together to support a cause because it was a good one. It was helping the person. It was respecting the dignity of the persons, and people could get behind it without without having to be on one side or the other. And absolutely, I am great. We had a lot of lessons. We were very young, very, very naive in some ways. That helped us because we were naive. Because I don't know if I'd be as adventurous now. But that living in community taught me a tremendous amount, even as a marital partner, 15 years of as a foster mom, as a person who works in a lot of different settings with a lot of different folks from a lot of different walks of life. And, the lessons keep coming. So absolutely, that living in community or family or among friends, that is where we're really called to bring a light first, and then go out to the corner pockets of the world.
And then, are there 3 locations now or 4?
So there were several throughout the states. One did close down back east, but there are actually many homes. Another home that just opened in the Phoenix area that we're excited about. My daughter and I volunteer just as volunteers. So it's a very full circle to see a baby that we knew, in arm, walking around at 25 now. It's surreal, really. But there are several homes, several new beginnings, and who knows? And I think that's the beauty of the unity, right? Is again, passing on the torch for others to then bring their God-given gifts to shine light.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks for that. I'm going to invite one more speaker, and then after that person goes, have us go into a breakout session where you'll have 7 minutes to talk with somebody else along the same lines that you have been hearing about. We're kind of modeling it for you. One of my questions is, can we, going back to the founders, the idea of being 13 separate things that could become one, that we did that all those years ago, almost 250, in the presence of common enemy. We fought the British twice in 40 years during those early years. Do you think it's possible to find unity without a common enemy? Keep that one in mind. But in the meanwhile, how about you, Pat? Are you? I know you're ready because we talked earlier in the week. You are a retired Air Force nurse, right?
Right. Yeah, I was in the Air Force during the Vietnam era, and it kind of set my professional life into a format that I never expected it to. I did essentially critical care as a very young nurse, and then I had a break-in service of about 1 year and went back in. And this was after my brother was killed in Vietnam. He was 20 when he died. He was in the Marine Corps. I had already been in the Air Force during that time, but I decided I was moving around so much, and I did various different kinds of nursing. And I decided I was moving around too much, so I went back in the Air Force for some financial stability, mainly.
Pat, were you in Vietnam?
Yes, I actually flew Aerovac. I was on strategic Aerovac. I was stationed at Clark in the Philippines, and we flew into Vietnam 3 or 4 times a week. As flight nurses, we were responsible for setting up our requirements for the mission. That means that we had to spend time, or what we call temporary duty, in Vietnam, and go and screen patients at the various hospital facilities and so forth to see what we would need to care for them during flight. And that could have been ventilators. It could have been what we called striker frames, where we people with cord injuries and that kind of thing. We had to be able to accommodate them. All kinds of medical requirements. Now it's very sophisticated and they have all these self-contained units. At the time, we didn't have all that sophisticated equipment. In fact, we still had glass IV bottles that we had to stabilize with adhesive tape on the stanchion poles in the aircraft. I was there in that capacity for 2.5 years approximately, and went up through just a regular line flight nurse. I became a flight nurse examiner, and that was about evaluating our training programs. I wrote a technical manual and for the safety of patients and the crew members. It was a very challenging time. It was a very sad time in a lot of ways, but we just kind of muddled through. We had wonderful crews. Our crews consisted usually of 2 registered nurses and 3 technicians. They did the heavy lifting. We did the rest. And we would generally move patients from various bases in Vietnam to our staging area in Japan. And we had to keep them going. They were oftentimes 3 days post-op when we were moving them. Most of them were surgical patients. Some of them were psychiatric. Some of them were severely psychiatric. In fact, if they were that severe, they had to be litter patients and sedated. But at the time, we had limited drugs. And some of those drugs were responsible in depressing the respiratory system. And we had to be careful because we were in a rarefied atmosphere. So we all had to pay attention and make sure that we were monitoring everybody.
Did you come under fire?
Yes.
Okay. So you had an enemy that was attempting to kill you while you were doing
it. We would fly in from our typical mission. We would deadhead in, which was a 2-hour flight from the Philippines into our in-country stations, pick up patients in the dark, usually, because there was less chance of being hit by having a rocket attack or a SAM. Our altitude, if we didn't have an altitude restriction for patients, was 41,000 feet, and that was to avoid the surface-to-air missiles. And we had to get out of harm's way, and then we could level off at a lower altitude, usually is what we did. But that 41,000 feet made the cabin pressure anywhere around 9,000 feet, which was kind of stressful for some of the patients. So you had to constantly monitor for oxygen deprivation during takeoff. And then when we get out of harm's way, then we could level off. And our missions could last with patients, depending on weather. And if we had to fly around, weather could last anywhere from 4.5 to 8 hours to Japan. But then you have to take into consideration we were flying on machines, on 141s mainly, and we'd have maintenance requirements, or we'd have a plane that was completely down for maintenance and then have to switch over to another one. We had to set up all of our equipment. We hauled our own equipment. We set up our own planes. We had to move everything, physically move it, including our medical equipment. It was hard physically. When I look back on it, I don't talk about it very much. There were some pretty horrible things that you see, and then I haven't seen since. The whole business of what's going on in the world, sometimes that brings it back up if I watch too much of the news. But there were some pretty horrible injuries, obviously, physical and mental. And but we muddled through. Never lost
the topic of this particular session having to do with feeling a part of all things or apart from all things. How did that play out during those years?
We had to work together. We didn't work together. And that meant from the very beginning of the mission to the very end, we had to coordinate with one another. We all had different roles. We had to set set the particular mission. We had to all discuss what we were going to do and what our roles would be on that mission, and in order to keep the patients comfortable as we could, in order to just give the best care we could under the circumstances and get them from point A to point B pretty much without undue harm. And that's what we did. Yeah. And it was very challenging at times. It was, but I was bringing my brothers and sisters home. So that was the good part. And that's what we all felt. And we all worked very hard to accomplish that. So
thank you.
That's very well done. Thank you for your service and for sharing that with us. I think now what I'd like to do is go over. I'm just about to send us into groups of two, where you're talking with one person and you have about 7 minutes in your conversation. I gave a little sheet to the presenters to go from. When you think of yourself as a part of everything, what are the pros and cons of that? When you think of yourself as separate from and maybe trying to move toward unity, what are the pros and cons of that? One word that I use a lot in my life, Pat, you were just using the word mission quite a lot. Military folk use the word mission a lot. It's the same word as mass, missio. When Catholics go to mass, we're people on a mission. One of my favorite political words, not just politics necessarily, but in life, is compromise. Co means to be with, pro means to be for, and missio is the mission. So a person who will compromise is a person who will be with others for the mission. That's what the word means etymologically. To compromise is not a person who's had a photo taken with the opposition or went against their values, or necessarily. A compromiser is a person who is one who will be with for the mission. And it sounds like you were doing that in a huge way from the Philippines and at 40,000 feet and in a war zone. Anyway, Sammy, would you send us into groups of two? We'll call you back in 15 minutes time. Please listen with one another and share with one another on the one and the many. Okay? Right behind me. He looks a little like Mr. Clean. You can clean your whole house and everything that's in it. Yeah. But he's actually my brother-in-law, and he's got a fascinating story that I don't know how he could get it into 7 minutes, but we're going to get him to try to do that. So his name is Guy, or Guilherme. He's from Portugal, and he lives in the Azores, but they're visiting me for a couple of months. And I want you to say hello to everybody and start a little bit with kind of some of the formative things in the earlier part of your life before you leap ahead, okay?
Okay, so it's a long story because I can see I have white beard, so I'll try to make it short. When I was younger, I was born in Portugal, and at the age of 18, I came to the United States. And when I came to the United States, I was leaving Portugal after a revolution that had happened in Portugal, a lot of instability, and coming to the United States was incredible because I was lucky. My father was a naval attaché for Portugal and the United States. So I came into the United States a bit in as a with a diplomatic passport, let's put it this way, and was a great introduction to the United States. Then at the age of 18, I went to Hawaii, and in those days in Hawaii, there was labor shortage. And in Hawaii, I could get a green card to become a permanent resident in the United States. So I did that. And in 1993, I became a US citizen. So, I have basically dual citizenship. In Portugal, you cannot let go of your previous citizenship, and then I wanted to be part of the United States. So I became a US citizen in 1993. and spent more time of my life in the United States than I actually did in Portugal, and most of the time in Hawaii and the South Pacific. So I had a chance to see a lot of different cultures, a lot of different ways of people behaving, and beliefs as well. That, the Pacific is still full of different beliefs that a lot of times we are not aware of. And one of the things I learned from that, how can we live through all these places without creating turmoil? How can we be accepted? Because we all want to be accepted, where we go. And what I learned was treat others the way you want to be treated. If we do that, that means we respect people, we love people, because you want to be loved, you want to be respected. And doing that creates harmony. And with harmony comes security and safety. So that is basically what I've learned through my, as time progressed, I became a captain on vessels. And with all this traveling I have been doing, I got a lot of sea time, and I became a U.S. Coast Guard captain for vessels. And nowadays, basically what happens is me and Cathryn are fortunate enough to be hired to go to some very remote areas to explore very different places of the world. But at the same time, we'll spend sometimes 16 days out at sea with no one around us. So basically, we become like not astronauts, but aquanauts. We are in the middle of the ocean, no reference anywhere of land, and we have to have harmony within our small nucleus of people. Otherwise, it's not safe, and we'll never get to the destination.
The thing that you haven't said is that you're a yacht captain.
Yeah, but so we deal with a lot of things. We deal with very different types of people, some very wealthy people, to going to a location which there's tribal people that don't never seen a boat before, to having to deal with different nationalities within the boat itself. Sometimes you'll have 7, 8 nationalities within the boat. And what I always tell everyone is the same thing again. Everybody has to respect each other. Everybody has to be responsible for your actions. And what I try to tell people is I want to create intimacy within the crew. What I mean by that is not hugging and kissing and being friendly. Intimacy to me is being able to communicate without fear and to talk about problems so we can find solutions. When we have that established within the boat, then we are able to have a safety and be able to have harmony, that we can all live happily in a small community.
I want to add, I've been a guest on a yacht with you.
Yes.
And not out in the wild blue ocean, but at least, at sea. And if you're on the crew, most of the crew is somewhere between 20 and 30 years old.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're living in bunk beds in tiny quarters. Whenever anybody's out of sorts or depressed or something like that, it happens around everybody else. So how do you manage that kind of thing? And sometimes people are working one of their first jobs, they might be irresponsible or whatever. How do you as a captain keep order and keep everybody united?
Well, like I said, I think being kind with people is the best way. At the same time, people cannot confuse kindness with weakness. We have to have a structure on board that people know what is expected from them. And if they don't follow that structure, we have to have a talk about it. But, what I always tell people is, I will respect you if you make a mistake and you come and talk to me. If you don't hide your mistake, we can find a solution. If you don't take responsibility for a mistake, then we're going to have to address it, because we all make mistakes, but the secret is to learn from our mistakes and move forward. So that's basically what we try to do on board. We are lucky enough that we've had the chance to work with the same crew for some time. So those mistakes become lesser and lesser. And we are able to support each other. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. And the secret is to allow people's strengths to rise, because when they rise, we can help each other, protect each other from our weaknesses. so as a team, we can work together and bring everybody up instead of putting down people, and that is what I think we need to do in this planet is instead of judging and putting people down, we need to look at what people have that is positive and try to rise them, make them a better person. We all do together.
And I'm going to add that what I've witnessed in the industry is a great many people are accustomed to being mistreated by a head of department or a captain. And they often on a new hire will come to you and be slightly afraid of you and then be surprised when you're actually very kind to them. And it actually works. And when you give that speech, do not mistake my kindness for weakness. It might take a little bit of time for that to set in, but I think it's a really important message. Do not mistake my kindness for weakness. When I personally, I try to be kind, and sometimes when I can't be kind, I think the best thing I can be is quiet until I can sort myself out and try again for kindness. And you do that all the time. You do that
Just
so
real
well.
quick, what we try to create is a culture that is not a culture of fear, because a culture of fear doesn't allow anybody to grow and creates turmoil, and fear also is fought with fear. If people don't have fear when they are doing something, they feel comfortable and they are relaxed and they can perform the best they can.
One thing I've seen you do, the yachts that he captains are super yachts. They're worth millions of dollars. And you might come into some little country with a lot of poverty, and then you have to deal with somebody at customs or whatnot that's got their hand out. You have to navigate a whole lot of interpersonal actions and cultural expectations of things without judgment, just trying to get along. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, we are basically a microeconomy as we travel through the world. And wherever we go, we can leave with us some of the economy that we are bringing with us. And that is what I try to, for example, one time I was on a voyage to Venezuela in which we had a special permit to go to the outer islands of Venezuela that are not open to the public. And we came across fishermen that had been there for 6 months, living off the water from the rain and fish. And we had with us food that we were not using. So we gave them the food and we gave them batteries so they could listen to the soccer games. And we donated to them what we had on board. And that can be a way that we can have a positive impact when you go to a different location. Everybody always looks at the yachting world as this, crazy industry that is just full of, egocentric people. But there's also another part that can be beneficial if we do it that way.
Yeah.
Well done. I had 7 people prepared and 6 arrived. Is everybody that came prepared to speak spoken? Okay, I thought so. We've got just about 20 minutes or a little less. I want to return us to the question, are we fundamentally a unity with many individual expressions? Or are we fundamentally many separate individuals who seek commonality? Try to keep that in the forefront for the next until 11:30 my time. But now I'm opening this up to comment. Maybe there's something that happened in your individual conversations with one another that you'd like to share with the rest of us. This is your time for all the way to the end of the session. So you can either just raise your hand like this or use the little icon thing at the bottom. I don't even know where to find it. There's a way that you can use a Zoom to raise your hand, but you have a hand, you can raise it.
Our king, we're talking to you.
Yeah, why don't you say something, Richard and Toto?
Where'd he go?
Here he is.
Why do you have to have a choice between one or the other points of view? I mean, I've seen that we're all part of the whole. We're all fractals of the source of life, which is the presence, which we call God. But We're all fractals of that, I mean, so, but not everybody realizes that, or not everybody believes that. But it's to me, it's not just a belief. More importantly, it's an experience. So what you're talking about, unitive consciousness, is more of an experience than it is anything to do with facts or reason, which we're blessed with, that separates us supposedly from the rest of the animal world, like Toto, who can reason a lot of things, who's just pure love. But I think what we were talking about in that little group was, at least I was, but and Cathryn brought it out when she first started, but our first instinct is to, I mean, we're animals, we're animals, that's still part of who we are. And so we are in packs, we run in packs. And so there's that part of us as well, that animal part of us, as well as the other parts of the animals that are more loving and comfortable and bonding and compassionate, that we've evolved into. But as we continue to evolve, and that's one thing we have to understand, is that we need to, as a lot of times, deconstruct a lot of things in our lives in order to construct them. One of the things, maybe this is about, I wasn't planning on talking, but one of the things I was thinking was, I often imagined things, any encounter I was going to have, or a conflict I might have had, or whatever. I always went into my imaginal world and seeing it play out, and seeing what I could do to make sure that it turned out to be positive and good, rather than anything else. I often, when I was building a church, I would get up in the morning and I would just imagine people up there were these little pieces, little lights that were shining, and that I wanted to see their light. Always wanted to see their light, no matter what was going to happen, whatever the encounter was going to be, because there was always a lot of conflicts and people not wanting certain things. But anyhow,
not everybody knows that about you, but you founded a church from a vacant lot. I remember crawling through that barbed wire fence onto the land, and that church is celebrating its 25th anniversary this weekend.
Yeah, that's right,
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know where he is. Where are you at?
He's within earshot. I can hear him. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Richard. Tracy has her hand up. So, Spikes, hit it. You have to unmute.
Toto.
Okay. Hi, thanks. One thing that came up in my small group was fear. Wanting to seek unity, but being afraid to put a bumper sticker on our car, for instance, that would indicate our political beliefs. And the very real violence that has been threatened and enacted by, quote, the other side. I think that gets in the way of unity. Could you speak to how to, and also what do we do when there is violence? We don't want to have so much seeking unity that we ignore the violence and let people get hurt. Can you speak to that?
I will after you do.
Ooh, what do you want me to say?
I've known you a long time, and I don't think that you're somebody that lets other people put words in your mouth. Wouldn't you say that's true?
I would say that
Or
is
is this
true.
just a puppet show? You just move your mouth and I'll speak the words. Answer your question first and I'll respond.
I'm really stuck on my question. I feel like I have had what Father Richard speaks to, one of those unitive consciousness experiences. I know we're all part of each other, but there's threats against people I love. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
I want to address this a little bit because,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
So one of the things we do in life is we have to be for example, we and Cathryn, we've traveled the ocean in which we have the threats of piracy, for example, in which people are being kidnapped and beheaded, and all this happens in those oceans. So what you cannot live in fear of it, but one needs to be prepared for it. One needs to have a proper action, how to behave if that position that happens, you know. So I think what we need to, when it's something like that, is to be ready for it and have a plan if somebody is actually coming to threaten you in person. And I don't mean, violence against violence, but to have maybe a way to escape, a refuge, a way to get away from the situation. That is what we train for. Because, for example, when you're in the middle of the ocean with pirates, our crew doesn't know how to handle a gun. I don't want a crew member shooting at somebody, but we can have create a safe place in the boat and call for help to come help us. So I think that is something that preventive plans on what to do if something actually happens would be a good way to go,
I'd also like to speak to that. That was really good. We teach scuba diving. So one of the things we do is we teach people how to survive in environments that are not meant to support human life. So there's plenty of opportunity for fear there. And we specifically teach people how to breathe through a regulator. The neurobiology of fear and excitement is exactly the same thing. What happens when we're afraid and what happens when we're excited? It's the same chemical juices that are going to be pulsing around in our meat suits. The difference is the breathing. When we fear, we tend to hold our breath. When we're excited, we tend to breathe more deeply and more rapidly. And if you'll think about it, when you watch any news program and they say, when we're coming live with so-and-so, whoever so-and-so is says, "Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here." Which they're probably not. They might actually be terrified, but they've been coached to say, "I am excited to be here." Because when they say that, it triggers the biochemical responses in the body to release the soup of excitement and say, "Oh, they're excited. Let's do the breathing thing." Instead of, "Uh-oh, they're afraid. Let's make them hold their breath." So it's a trick that you can use when you're fearful. You can say, "I might be afraid, but I'm actually really excited to be in this situation right now." Big deep breath. And then you go. So if you can flip it from fear into excitement and give your body a long enough time to react, you're already moving towards something that feels safer. Does that help?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. And if you want to learn to scuba dive, hit us up.
Somebody else. Leo, what do you got?
You have to unmute.
You have to unmute yourself, or all we see is your lips moving and nothing coming out of them. Unmute.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. No, I was back in December and talking about fear. My wife was in bed for 2 months under hospice. And she asked me, she says, "Am I dying?" And I had a daughter-in-law that says, "Oh, no, you're not." And I became upset with that daughter-in-law. I says, "You tell her the truth." And so I went and I spoke with my wife, and she says, "Am I dying?" I says, "Yes, darling, you are. But have no fear. We have a daughter that was 3 days old and baptized." I says, "She'll be there waiting for you. And your grandma that came in the dream to your mother that brought us together, she's got to be there waiting for you to greet you." And so she became much more relaxed. And then later she says, well, when I die, are you going to get remarried? And I says, darling, if you can give me a good reason. And she tried. And I says, no, those are not enough good reasons. She didn't want me to be alone. I says, our daughter that we have been taking care of you now will stay here with me until I join you. And so she was at peace and ease. And she died a happy death at home with us around her on the third Sunday at Advent, 4:30 in the morning.
Awesome.
Thank you, Leo.
You're welcome.
She was a great lady and a great cook. I remember anytime I was at your house, there was always just wall-to-wall food.
Oh, yes. She was a great cook and she made me a better person than I was when I first met her.
That's hard to even
I was a
imagine.
good boy. I was a good boy then, and she made me better.
That's awesome.
How about somebody else?
Shelley has her hand up, I think, but I just wanted to say one thing about the fear piece is that I do think, because, you know, the different sides and the viewpoints that at some point, if you ask for the wisdom of which and when to pick your battles, and you don't necessarily need to put yourself, you know, in undue fire, but, you know, by posting a bumper sticker in places that you know that won't be welcomed, but that if you look at the reasoning behind whatever you're communicating with the diverse others is, if it comes from a place of where you want to change an opinion, you know, often that's not going to be as successful versus seeking to understand. And you can still be very authentic and very true to who you are. And sometimes the best way to move in those spaces and places where there are that diverse thinking is just being the example of who you are, right? And letting them see the example of whatever piece of the pie that you represent is showing your own example, and that can sometimes move and change and create that understanding. But I think Shelley had a hand up.
You want to say something, Shelley?
Sure. One of the things that came up for me right off the bat is an obstacle to community, which is often matters of money, which we haven't talked about yet. And something that occurred to me, and I wrote sort of a sentence that really communicates that matters of money can compromise our capacity to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And this also comes from, I think, from personal experience, where a lot of my greatest friendships, partnerships, working relationships, conflicts came about over a matter of money. And it could be a small amount of money, but, you know, there would be a conflict and then the trust would be broken and then everything else kind of goes out the window. So just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I can make a comment. I used to do a lot of marriage preparation because being a campus minister for so long, a lot of people meet their future spouses while they're at college. And I used to make them talk a lot about money because it really is just a symbol system. The paper, the coin, the electronic blips, none of it has, unless you're, you know, trading in gold bars or something, most of the time, the stuff that we use in the monetary system is not that valuable. It's just a way that we communicate what's important to us. When you go to the store and you look at any object and it has a price tag on it, you have to stand there and decide, is that thing worth this in trade? And you're really talking about your values. So when couples very often would argue about money, they're really arguing about what's most important to me. And so when people do quarrel over money, sometimes it's just simply, you know, you promised to pay me back and you didn't. Well, that's just about honesty. But sometimes when people are arguing over money, they're really arguing about what's most important to me, but they're just not phrasing it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's from my point of view, that's the part that hurt me the most, would be like in a relationship or a friendship, and someone made money a really valuable part of the relationship, and it was just sort of like, oh, really? That's what matters to you? You know? So I think I don't know. It's just sometimes it's hard to come together as a community when people have money on their minds.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Yeah, Michael, if you didn't raise your hand, I was going to call on you. We've only got like 2 or 3 minutes left, and we haven't heard from you.
Well, that's all I need. I like Father Richard when he talked about fractals. A fractal being a piece of a whole, that piece contains the whole. Doesn't that speak to this whole idea of unity?
Yes.
That you know, you can make the case, and I love to talk about it, and I won't now, that the entire universe is consciousness. It's all conscious. We're all related to it. But thinking more specifically about some of the conversations that we've had, this idea of fear, that idea of, gee, what's happening out there in the world, and how can we better adapt to what's happening so that we're more reflective of unity and God's unity. And I just want to end with a quote from a person I love dearly, and I think it speaks to this beautifully. And it's Carolyn Mays, who is an intuitive healer, who wrote, she remarked that in our grieving, we may feel like an inconsequential mote of dust floating in an incomprehensibly large and impersonal universe. No one cares or understands us. But she says it's a spiritual paradox. It's a paradox, she says, because we live in such a vast universe, and yet simultaneously we are so intimately known to God that every detail of our lives somehow matters. I just find that so inspirational. I just wanted to share that.
Well, you're just a walking inspiration, I think. Even though you're not walking at the moment, you're inspirational. And you're in year one of grieving your beloved who passed suddenly last December, and we still, have a hole in our hearts around Linda's leaving us. Well, we're all the way at the end of the time. I want to just say thank you for all of you deciding to spend a little time with the rest of these beautiful people. I'm grateful to know all of you as I do. And if you'd like to be in touch, if you want to give any critique about how this went and how something in the future might go differently or better, I'd love to hear that. Do you guys have anything to add? Okay.
Thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you.
All right. Chantel, are you still there? Do you have anything to say to these people as kind of the boss of me?
Thank you so much for coming. This week, Tuesday, the Joyful Fire podcast is the 2nd year anniversary. And we have a special host, Dana Taylor. If you guys know her from Spiritual Awakenings International, she is the guest host of the show, and she's interviewing Father Nathan.
Yeah, it's the first time we've had a guest host. I'm the guest on my own show. She interviewed me for the anniversary show.
Yeah, and it's really good. And then he has a couple afterlife retreats coming up at the end of October, and then a couple other fun things. So if you pay attention and follow Father Nathan Castle's Facebook page, and we'll send out a newsletter too.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Ready, set, go. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.